from this sunny New York morning. Although I understand we are expecting a big snowstorm again tonight, but right now it looks like a beautiful morning. It's great to have you all here with us, and allow me at the outset really to warmly welcome you all to this briefing that is about the response of the UN to the request of the General Assembly to explore the potential development and use of a multi-dimensional vulnerability index for the small island developing states. This briefing is organized together with OHR LLS and UN DESA. My name is Hades Crederis-Fox. I'm the director of UN OHR LLS, and I'm pleased to moderate today's discussion. This meeting is really a first in line that what we are hoping will be an ongoing dialogue between all relevant stakeholders, institutional partners and member states as we are moving ahead with this very important mandate that the General Assembly has given us. That is the potential development and eventually potential use of a multi-dimensional vulnerability index for the small island developing states. And I think it's obvious that there is a clear need and a real momentum for this work at the moment. As we move forward, we want to make sure that all important stakeholders are part of this process from the very beginning so that we can build common ground and understanding during this process. This way, at the end of it, we can hopefully have some concrete ideas that have the buy-in of all. And we can also make sure that we learn from some previous attempts on this, unsuccessful processes, and make sure that this time we come up with something that is acceptable and implementable. It is very important. So today we have some short presentations of the ongoing UN work on this, and then we move to interactive discussion to share ideas and views. And we at the UN side are very eager to hear from member states' views and guidance on as we are moving ahead of this process. And as I said in the beginning, we are planning to have more of these meetings as we move ahead. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have a great pleasure to give the floor to Undersecretary General and High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states, Pekita Moeloa Utoikamanu, for your opening remarks. USG, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Heidi. Excellencies, colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all to our general briefing on the development of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index for Small Island Developing States. And I thank our colleagues in UN DESA for partnering with us on this exciting undertaking. As you're all aware, this work has been mandated by the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 75/215 para 8A, which calls on the UN Secretary General to provide recommendations as part of this report on the present resolution to the General Assembly at its 76th session on the potential development and coordination of work within the United Nations system on a multidimensional vulnerability index for small island developing states, including on its potential finalization and use. This is a mandate that has been taken on even more critical meaning where we all everywhere in the world are in the midst of responding to and only beginning to recover from COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has been brutal in and on the SIDS. SIDS always faced rather complex developmental and environmental challenges, but we now have added hosts of challenges. We barely have a decade left to turn to the 2030 agenda goals into tangible results for people. SIDS were already struggling prior to the pandemic, and now the struggle is much greater. I cannot emphasize enough how urgent it is now to mobilize the necessary resources to implement the Samoa Pathway and the 2030 agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 induced crisis is indeed unprecedented. That SIDS are highly vulnerable to endogenous and exogenous shocks has long been recognized by the global community. Indeed, we have reaffirmed over and over again, and most recently in the political declaration of the midterm review of the Samoa pathway held in 2019, that SIDS remain a special case for sustainable development. Their vulnerabilities are specific, unique, and definitely not small. Yet SIDS remain constrained in meeting their goals in all three dimensions of sustainable development. The attempt to develop a vulnerability index for SIDS is not new. Way back at the first international conference on SIDS in 1994, where the Barbados Program of Action was adopted, we have been discussing across the United Nations system and beyond the use of indices developed specifically for SIDS. Already then, this was agreed on as a first step in addressing the issue of vulnerability. Ladies and gentlemen, with the mandate before us now, we now have the opportunity to really move ahead with these efforts by building on the great body of work that has been generated both within and outside the United Nations system. Today, DESA and OHR LLS will set out the roadmap to fulfill the mandate given to us by the General Assembly last year. This will not be an easy undertaking. Previous experience tells us that the task at hand is a complex one, both technically and politically. This is why our roadmap includes a series of briefings and consultations, both technical and political in nature. The intent is to be as inclusive and as thorough as possible. Every effort must be made to include all relevant stakeholders and give them the opportunity to shape the process so we get coherent and concrete results. We want the best possible outcomes for SIDS. We must do everything to get the broadest possible support for the Secretary General's recommendations in the lead up to the intergovernmental discussions at the 76th session of the General Assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, in line with the principle to leave no one behind, we believe that the development of a multidimensional vulnerability index for SIDS is critical to ensure evidence-based, targeted, and effective support to these countries in the era of COVID-19 and beyond. I look forward to our discussions today and to facilitating the delivery of this important tool to the global community in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, USG Utoikamanu, for your important message and really emphasizing the urgency that we have and need for this work. Now it's my great pleasure to invite Mr. Eliot Harris, the Assistant Secretary General for UN-DESA, to take the floor. Eliot, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Heidi. Excellencies, Under Secretary General Fikita Utoikamanu, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. While the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the entire world, it has brought serious economic hardship and damage to the small island developing states. They are now disproportionately suffering from the global decline in international travel and tourism, global commodity prices, and the overall disruption in worldwide trade and supply chains. On the front line of multiple world crises, climate, nature, health, and the economy, the acute structural challenges and vulnerabilities of the SIDS are more than ever exposed, and they are intensifying over time. Indeed, these multiple vulnerabilities interact and drive one another at an alarming rate. The complex causes for vulnerability will persist, but they are not being properly characterized. Above all, these vulnerabilities cannot be captured through the GDP per capita lens. And thus, for many SIDS, the development of a multidimensional vulnerability index is a pressing but still unfinished business. For 3 decades, small island developing states have argued that the GDP per capita index does not adequately capture their special vulnerabilities, and they've called for the establishment of an MVI. This is critical in particular for those SIDS that are being disqualified from concessional resources owing to their relatively high level of GDP per capita. The General Assembly, as the USG has just mentioned, in its most recent resolution on the implementation of the Samoa pathway, has requested the Secretary General to make recommendations on the possible development, use, coordination, and finalization of a multidimensional vulnerability index for the SIDS. The development of such a composite MVI would be crucial to advancing the global understanding of vulnerabilities, redefining and refining global policy, and improving resource allocation to address the vulnerability of the SIDS. A composite MVI can be a tool for smarter and targeted eligibility for financing for sustainable development in the small island developing states. It is in our collective interest that we bring a closure to this long-standing request. But the reasons for an MVI for the SIDS do not stop with financing access. Rather, such an index can help to identify the other areas of vulnerability where the SIDS could benefit from better articulated and targeted support in non-financial form. Technical assistance at affordable cost, for example, market access on suitable terms and conditions, suitably priced access to insurance instruments that can help to absorb some of the shock of the climate-related disasters that the SIDS remain exposed to. Such an index can also help to understand better the impact of the inequalities of income distribution that deepen the individual vulnerabilities of the citizens of the SIDS well beyond what the GDP per capita might otherwise indicate. Excellencies, UNDESA, as the Secretariat of all the Sustainable Development Agendas for the SIDS, including the Samoa Pathway, is fully aware of the history, the technicalities, and the sensitivities surrounding the development of a multidimensional vulnerability index for SIDS. We have been on this road for quite some time. We're also aware of all of the good work that has been done towards the development of an MVI for SIDS by partners both within and outside the UN system. In this regard, I wish to especially acknowledge the most recent initiative led by the network of UN resident coordinators in SIDS under the leadership of the UN resident coordinator in Samoa. The recent work by UNDP is also to be recognized. Several efforts have also been made by other UN system agencies, by multilateral development banks and financial institutions, as well as by the Commonwealth Secretariat. In response to the request by the General Assembly, UNDESA and UNOHR-LLS have agreed on a strategy and a work program to gather information from all relevant stakeholders in order to formulate appropriate recommendations to be presented to you at the 76th session of the General Assembly. You will hear more on this in today's briefing. But, ladies and gentlemen, let me point out that this work, as critical as it is for the SIDS, is also very relevant for the broader group of middle-income countries. Our progress with an MVI for the SIDS will pave the way for similar progress for that much broader group of countries and for the hundreds of millions of poor people who live in them. Excellencies, in concluding, I wish to reiterate our strong commitment to strengthening our long-standing cooperation and support to the SIDS to make progress in addressing their vulnerabilities and supporting their collective sustainable development efforts. This will go a long way towards ensuring that we leave no one behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elliot, for those very important remarks and reflecting also about the work that has already gone into this and making sure that we take along the knowledge and the lessons learned from those many processes that have been ongoing and are still ongoing inside and also outside the UN. So now, ladies and gentlemen, it's our opportunity now to have a little bit of information that we wanted to provide to you of what the UN is doing right now, the ongoing work. And it's a great pleasure to me to invite first Saina Voti, the chief of the SIDS unit or in the Division of Sustainable Development Goals in UNDESA, to take the floor, and he will be talking a little bit about also some of the historical lessons learned, and then present to you also the strategy and the work plan that OHR-LS and DESA are working together on. And then after that, I will give the floor to the resident coordinator of Samoa, Tokelau, Niue, and Cook Islands, Simona Marinescu, who will be talking and presenting the work that she has been coordinating and leading, which has been done by some of the SIDS RCs and senior economists, and what is going on at that time. And then I will give the floor to our colleague Riyad Medeb, who is our SIDS head at UNDP, to talk about a discussion paper that the UNDP has provided as an input to this important discussion. And then I would very much like to have a lot of time for your comments and your questions and any suggestions, and also on the work and also to the strategy and our work plan, so that we know that we take on board your ideas and your views on it. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Sai. You have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Heidi, Excellencies, Under Secretary General Ms. Utoikamanu, Assistant Secretary General Mr. Harris, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed an honor and pleasure for me to be presenting this brief on behalf of the Secretariat, UNDES this morning. I have a PowerPoint presentation, which I will now share on the screen. As was mentioned in the opening remarks, for many small island developing states, the development of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index remains an unfinished business.
Sai, I'm sorry to interrupt, just to say that if you are wanting to share your, we don't see anything, but just let me know so that we are sure that what you're presenting, and if you want to share something with us, it's presented. Sorry to interrupt again.
My deepest apology, Ms. Heidi. I wanted to share my screen. Can you see the screen?
I cannot. If others can, please indicate so. But I see the participants on my screen.
All right, let me play with this, Heidi, for a while. Just bear with me, Excellencies. Let me try it once again. All right. Now it seems that I cannot share my screen for some reason, Heidi. So in that respect, I will just continue with my statement.
Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you kindly. As I was mentioning, the opening remarks did mention that this multi-vulnerability index for SIDS is, to many of them, an unfinished business. The resolution of the United Nations General Assembly that was declared last year gave direction to the Secretary General to do certain responsibilities and to come back to you this year in his annual report regarding the development of this index. Now, this is an important request, and it was, in fact, the only new mandate to be requested by the Assembly, despite the agreement by member states on rollover resolutions. Now, the importance of it prompts the Secretary to conduct this briefing today. The overall intention of this briefing is to inform you of the strategy and of the work program of the Secretariat, what they have in mind to implement the request of the Assembly in the most efficient, most inclusive, and most transparent manner. Now, this briefing, and you would have seen a PowerPoint to that effect, will be divided into two main parts. The first will be, and it's intended to be, a refresher. I hear Ms. Heidi, I hear Mr. Harris, and the Undersecretary General have all referred to the long process that we have been together, the sensitivity that's surrounding this matter and also the difficult technicalities that is involved. Now, on my part, for those who do not have the benefits of having the memory that goes back 3 decades, I would like to just take us down memory lane for a short while in order for us to have a proper perspective to where we are trying to get at. Now, it will, I will, in this part, discuss the historical evolution of the intergovernmental discussions on the Vulnerability Index. We will revisit some of the mandates that was agreed, and we will discuss the various work undertaken so far, and we reflect on those results and draw lessons from it. And the second part of my briefing will, of course, be to explain what the Secretariat has in mind to carry this work forward. Excellencies, Member States, you will recall that for the first time, you asked for the consideration for the development of the Vulnerable Index was in 1992 in the Agenda 21. You were very clear then on whom you wanted these indices to apply. To quote you, you said small islands and low-lying critical coastal areas. Now fast forward 2 years, in 1994, paragraph 113 and 114 of the Barbados Program of Action, you requested specifically for the development of vulnerability indices for small island developing states. Now, in 1985, the General Assembly renewed this request. And as a result, in 1996, at its 4th session, the Commission for the Sustainable Development made a decision encouraging relevant bodies of the United Nations system to accord priority to the development of such an index. The General Assembly, in its annual resolutions on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Priority of SIDS from 1996 to 2003, continued to call and urge for the development of such index. Excellency, the last agreed language pronounced by the General Assembly on this matter was in 2003, in Resolution 57-266, when it urged for the finalization of this work by 2004. You will recall that it was then when we were preparing to go to Mauritius for the second conference. Excellencies, there was no further pronouncement by any major organ of the United Nations on the development of the Vulnerability Index from 2004 to the year 2020, a 16-year silence. However, interesting to note that in 2005, the Mauritius strategy called for the establishment of a task force to elaborate on a resilience index. In 2010, the midterm review of the Mauritius strategy, you did not mention anything about the index, but instead called for the development of a vulnerability resilience country profile. Again, in 2014, when you adopted the Samoa pathway, no mention of the index. In fact, paragraph 114, as you are well aware of the Samoa pathway, make reference to the development of a vulnerability resilient country profile. Now, the silence of the Assembly was broken in 2020 by the COVID-19 pandemic. Excellencies, let me quickly just take you back to the period 1996 to 2003. This period is important because it was because majority of the work on the vulnerability index for SIDS was discussed and decided. There were a number of organizations of the United Nations system And because I don't have the PowerPoint presentation, UNTAD, FAO, ECLEC, UNSCAP, the Pacific Community through SOPEC, UNEP, the World Bank Group, Commonwealth, and the Committee for Development Planning were all heavily involved and made significant contributions to the development of a vulnerability index for SIDS in the late 1990s and early 2000. It is important to note that the ECOSOC, the Commission for Sustainable Development, and the Development Committee for Policy Development also played a significant role in steering intergovernmental discussion on the subject matter, each with their own reports, recommendations, and decisions. In 1996, Resolution 5116 of the General Assembly, you requested the Secretary General to ensure that this work was to carry forward, and you gave a distinct direction to the Secretariat to carry that forward. Now, accordingly, a conceptual framework and a paper was developed and was distributed to small island developing states and to the UN system organization. This paper provided analysis of the inherent vulnerability of SIDS. It discussed possible approach to vulnerability issues and suggested that consideration be given to the construction of an economic vulnerability index and an ecological index, each composed of a number of appropriate indicators. Now, more than 20 responses were received, all supportive of the main thrust of the background paper. In 1997, UNDESA engaged two consultants, one to develop an economic vulnerability and the other to develop an ecological vulnerability index. The department also convened an ad hoc expert group to review the technical work of the consultants and make appropriate recommendations. I want to focus in a bit on the important work that was carried out by this expert group. Now, they did review all the studies that were placed before them, including those that were specifically prepared for their consideration. A total of 19 composite indices combining different sets of indicators were reviewed. The exercise was done to a maximum of 111 countries, including 30 developing island states. It was interesting to note that in their analysis, employing all the indices that was before them, the group concluded the following four conclusions. Number one, as a group, small island developing states are more vulnerable than other groups of developing countries. Number two, they said that vulnerability referred to is structural vulnerability that depends on factors which are not under the control of national authorities when the shocks occur. The indicators should reflect exposure to shocks. That is to say, their magnitude and the probability. The third finding that they found, a large number of possible indicators of vulnerability can be conceived, but only those consistent with the above definition of vulnerability should be used. Some structural handicap cannot be considered as vulnerabilities. Not all potentially, the final conclusion they reached that not all potentially relevant indicators can at present be meaningfully included into a composite vulnerability index because of constraints imposed by insufficient data, the difficulty of quantifying some indicators, and the need for simplicity. Now, that expert group considered that other groups or bodies, such as the Committee for Policy Development, should also consider these indicators. Now, subsequently, the Committee for Development in 1997 reviewed the work of the ad hoc working group on the development of the Vulnerability Index and considered the usefulness of the Vulnerability Index as a criterion for the designation of least developed countries. SIDS a group's quest for a vulnerability index appears to have ended in the Committee for Development Policies, despite repeated subsequent call by the General Assembly and other bodies for that work to continue. There was a keynote address delivered at the time by the chair of EOSIS lamenting this fact. And this is the unfinished business that ASG Harris was talking about. Now, distinguished delegates and colleagues, indices are complicated issues, as we have heard already. It is a subject requiring specific expertise. It may be worth our while to recall that in their analysis, the expert group also made a number of observations, which in hindsight could offer lessons learned as we go forward. For instance, the group observed that an index of human and economic loss due to natural disasters was too broad and would not operationally feasible, and suggested that efforts should continue to undertake systematic assessment of economic impact of natural disasters, which could eventually be used for this purpose. The group also suggested that future work should consider the feasibility of including services in the computation of the concentration index, as this would increase its relevance to small island developing states and other developing countries. The group expressed concern of the lack of data needed to compute variables relevant to economic vulnerability for many small island developing states, and recommend and emphasize that efforts should be given towards filling those gaps. As far as the vulnerability of small island developing states is concerned, it was suggested that a set of data, including time series data for the separate indicators, should be collected for each country, and specifically requested when data are missing in order to design vulnerability profile, covering both economic and ecological aspect. The question that we must ask from the observation of the expert group at this juncture, what has been done to address these findings and these suggestions? Have we conducted further studies on the issues that they identified back then? Has the data situation for small island developing states improved? Now, on lessons learned, we can also learn a lot of lessons from the evolution of the index's mandates itself. One might want to ask, why did the Agenda 21 make specific reference to the development of vulnerability index for small islands and low-lying coastal areas? This appears to be a geographical categorization. Why did the Mauritius strategy focus its emphasis on the development of a resilience index? Was this aspect not fully considered by the ad hoc working group? Now, one could also ask, why did the outcome document of the high-level review of the Mauritius strategy and the Samoa pathway document itself shift the emphasis to the development of vulnerability resilience country profile? Could the solution for SIDS lie in the universal application of a formula used for the calculation and computation of such a profile? Moreover, lessons could be learned from the action of the UN Secretariat, the deliberation of ECOSOC, the work of the Commission for Sustainable Development, and their decisions and recommendations, including of the Committee for Development Policy. Was the process we adopted back in the 90s the best process to discuss topic of this nature to ensure its successful options? Why did those discussions end the way they did? Why did the request of SIDS as a group fade in a manner it did, and instead the index that was developed for them ended up being applied as a criteria for determining graduation of least developed countries? Will the continued insistence by SIDS for a specific index for them alone attract universal consensus? By the way, do we want the MVI that we're about to develop to replace GDP or complement it? Will such an MVI be used to rank countries as some kind of a who's the most vulnerable amongst us type of competition? These are provocative and important questions, and their answers may provide guidance on the way forward. Excellencies, to conclude this part, you may be wondering why the Secretariat is belaboring on this. It is because that we have been down this road before. And a good number of you and a good number of us holds the view that the development of a multidimensional vulnerability index is an unfinished business. Reminding ourselves of the past may assist in our work together as we go to the future. Excellencies, we all know that the work on the MVIs didn't come to an abrupt halt just because the silence of the General Assembly for the last 16 years. In fact, most of the organizations outside the General Assembly continued their work in one form or another during this period. I may name the World Bank, the Commonwealth Secretariat, International Monetary Fund, the Caribbean Development Bank, to name a few. Other institutions may have, in fact, be applying some sort of index in their decision making to facilitate their assistance to developing countries, including SIDS. The Assembly's call for the recommendation of a possible MVI for SIDS now warrant the Secretariat to reach out to this organization and perhaps other UN system agencies working on this issue to gather information and all of this initiative for your consideration. Excellencies, COVID-19 has continued to put pressure on the financial and economic viability of most SIDS, particularly those with high debt to GDP ratio, as you've heard in the opening remarks. The chair of EOSIS in 2020 wrote to the Secretary General reiterating the need to move forward the work of the MBI. As you may know, and as Heidi has mentioned, responding to the request of EOSIS, the United Nations Coordinator Network in SIDS, led by the resident coordinator in Samoa, in collaboration with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, have commenced the most recent work yet towards the development of an MVI for SIDS. The Secretariat want to specifically and especially highlight this effort. It was the role and the leadership of the resident coordinator in SIDS on this matter is a manifestation and a visible evidence that your decision to invest, to realign, and to reinvigorate the RC system is yielding positive results in SIDS. We too, at the Secretariat, under our 2021 work program, will be gathering this information from the RCs and their work, the outcome of which will be fully made known to you in due course. Similarly, the UNDP has made available a discussion paper on the subject, which they intend to be their contribution on this matter under this new UNGA mandate. UNDP's paper is the most recent completed piece of observation and suggestion to be formulated on the subject to date. Distinguished delegates, to deliver the request of the General Assembly within the short time frame given, and to ensure open, inclusive, and transparent proceedings, the Secretariat, UNDESA, and OHRLS, within their respective mandates, have agreed on a strategy and a work program to carry their responsibilities forward. These include a series of technical webinars organized by UNDESA, whereby invitations will be issued to all entities and organizations within and outside the United Nations system working on an MVI for SIDS to come forward and articulate their work, share their experience and lessons learned, challenges and opportunities. They will also be invited to share their views on the potential development of the MVI, the coordination of work, the duration of the finalization of the work, and its potential use. Information gathered from this technical webinar series will be used to form the basis of the recommendations of the Secretary General's report pursuant to the 75-215 resolution. I want to also issue invitations to colleagues who are listening in today that if you are working on a vulnerability index or your organization is working on some kind of index, to please also get in touch with the Secretariat, and we will be invited also to participate and make presentations in those series of webinars. And the same go to member states. If there are any member states who wish to make specific presentation on the MVIs, please do contact the Secretariat. Now, additionally, OHRLS will be responsible for organizing a series of informal member states briefing and consultations, which will be held to inform members of the progress of consultations in the technical webinar series and to solicit views and share ideas on member states' preferences on the finalization and the use of the MVIs. This series of briefings will also include the participation of the national focal points from SIDS. A record of this proceeding will be made available through recorded videos or written summaries. UNDESA will create a dedicated MVI webpage under the SIDS window of the Division of Sustainable Development Goals website to record the progress of the consultations briefing and the development of the MVI. Excellencies, we truly trust that this time around, together, member states will come to a consensus on a multidimensional vulnerability index. As Secretariat, we will ensure that the implementation of our work program on the issue will result in a credible set of recommendations that will facilitate your deliberation on the use, coordination, and finalization of an MVI for SIDS. To conclude, I am reminded of the words of the former Secretary General, Mr. Boutros Ghali, who in 1992 observed, and I quote, "The GNP per capita index does not adequately capture the special vulnerabilities of island developing countries. For this reason, the establishment of a family of indicators of vulnerability of islands developing countries is a useful exercise. This is especially so in the case of small ones that are being disqualified from certain financial and technical assistance owing to their relatively high GNP per capita ranking." Ms. Heidi, thank you very much indeed, and that completes my briefing this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Sai, for that very comprehensive look back on the previous work on these different indices. And it's absolutely very important to keep in mind and learn lessons from those processes. And there's one additional process that I would like to bring to that. I think that is very important for us as we move forward. And that happened as recently as 2018. And that was when the Committee on Development Policy made a concrete recommendation to create a specific category of vulnerable countries facing extreme vulnerability to climate change and external shocks. So this was a recommendation by the CDP to the GA. And in the discussion and subsequent decision, the GA categorically rejected this idea. And they even put in writing that the GA decides not to endorse this recommendation of creating a separate category for vulnerable countries. So also, what are the lessons learned from this process? And this rejection was from several SIDS countries as well. It was a very, very important process at the time. So there are certainly lessons learned from there as well. Now I know we are far along, and I want to get to the presentations by Simona and Riyad, but Tishka, I give you 1 minute to add what you wanted to add to SIDS presentation from the part of OHR LLS.
Thank you, Heidi, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll take this opportunity to highlight very briefly how OHR LLS sees its role in this process. So the coordination and outreach with member states, financial institutions, and other stakeholders, which is complementary to the technical discussions, is central. We see it as central to ensuring the support and buy-in necessary to make this process a success and the outcomes workable. So as outlined in the roadmap, we'll convene a series of consultations to collect feedback regarding your expectations and views on MVI development, scope, and use at different stages of the process. These meetings will include a range of bilateral and multilateral consultations, some, as mentioned, with SIDS national focal points, and some that can be organized on request where possible. This engagement with you will be open and inclusive, and it will allow for your views to be heard and taken into consideration as we move ahead with our work. So today is our first consultation, and we have others scheduled for April and May. And we will explore specific dates and configurations for our meetings as the process develops. We will keep you informed every step of the way. Additionally, OHR LLS and DESA will jointly prepare a knowledge product to complement the recommendations to be presented in the SG's report and to foster a broad understanding of a possible MVI and its possible use. We will provide further information on that product in due course, and including on when we expect to release it. So that, Heidi, is it for me, so I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tishka Francis, head of our SIDS sub-program at OHR LLS. Now it's my great pleasure to hand over to Simona Marinescu, who is the RC of Tokelau, Samoa, Tokelau, Niue, and Cook Islands, and who has been coordinating a group of RCs from SIDS and some senior economists and leading the work on and discussions on this very important topic. Simona, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Heidi. Excellencies, Under-Secretary General Utoi Kamanu, Assistant Secretary General Harris, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from Samoa, top of the morning in Samoa, and indeed a great honor to be able to speak on behalf of the resident coordinators of the SIDS on this topic. In the interest of time, I will not use a presentation, I will just brief all delegates on the progress to date and look forward to interventions, comments, and feedback. Allow me at the outset to re-express our high commitment, the resident coordinators and resident coordinator offices in the SIDS to the development of our small island developing states in line with the Samoa Pathway, the 2030 Agenda, the global frameworks that SIDS have adopted, in the pursuit of which we believe that taking a more analytical approach, identifying vulnerabilities and gaps, is critical. I guess we all learned some powerful lessons from the ongoing pandemic as to how suboptimally addressed vulnerabilities and gaps can have profoundly adverse consequences on our people and our planet. We acknowledge the member states' call on the United Nations system through GA Resolution 75/215 to report at the 76th UN General Assembly on a potential multidimensional vulnerability index and its potential use. And owing to the enhanced capacities of the resident coordinator function and the resident coordinator offices as a result of the UN reform, we have been able to embark, I guess, for the first time on a joint analysis of the status, the context in our countries, and analysis of the multidimensional vulnerability of the SIDS, with the aim to contribute to the wider UN effort to responding to the resolution within the process led by UNDESA and OHR-LLS. So I just want to put on the record that we are part of the process that together with DESA, OHR-LLS, UNDP, and others, we aim to address the call made on us through the recent resolution. To ensure that the multidimensional vulnerability analysis and the index represent an independent output and it has the technical soundness, we engaged into a partnership. We entered into very recently into a partnership with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network and Professor Jeffrey Sachs as the president of the network, with the objective to pursue a foundational analysis of multidimensional vulnerability of the SIDS, learning from all the lessons that SAI so comprehensively put forward, and design a few index options that could inform the report of the Secretary General this September. And to advance the work, in addition to the resident coordinator offices, including economists, strategic planners, data managers, we also recruited together with SDSN a dedicated resource, a senior economist who will ensure that our work together with Professor Sachs and SDSN will lead to a report very, very soon. Resources for this partnership have been secured from our own budgets, from the allocations made by from the Special Purpose Trust Fund to resident coordinator offices. So we have not mobilized yet external resources, and concluded the partnership that will start on 24th of February. But I just want to mention that to date, we have already produced a series of analysis, some options for multidimensional vulnerability that we had an opportunity to present to smaller groups of member states, including to the Alliance of Small Island States, to G77 in the preparation of the resolution, and to other groupings. And into this partnership, I would like to mention that the resident coordinators involved are those in Barbados and OECS, Cabo Verde, Comoros, Cuba, Fiji, Guyana, Jamaica, the Maldives, Mauritius and Seychelles, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, obviously Sao Tome and Principe, Timor-Leste, Trinidad and Tobago. And we also have additional partners, UN partners from the Pacific, UNESCO, FAO, and UNDP, Samoa MCO. The approach that the RCOs, the resident coordinator offices that form this technical group for this work are taking is to bring under review all of the multidimensional vulnerability indices produced to date, refine the analysis, consult with all the stakeholders, and hopefully we'll soon have an opportunity for a technical discussion, including with international financial institutions, and come up with a sound report by as early as April 2021, to allow again the report back of the Secretary General to be ready, consulted with the member states in advance and ready for presentation in September. Various multidimensional vulnerability options and potential use recommendations resulting from the UN SDSN partnership will be consulted thoroughly with the member states, possibly using the National Focal Points Network of OHR-LLS, and also getting guidance from AOSIS in this regard. So we have identified 3 potential scenarios to date, but I just want to mention that this is, the work is far more advanced than that at this point, but I'm just trying to anchor a little bit the technical discussion into some of the options identified. Scenario 1 looks into a holistic approach to analyzing multidimensional vulnerability, considering the nexus vulnerability resilience from a social, economic, and environmental perspective, and measure vulnerability as a resilience deficit. And I want to put on the record that the social dimension of the MVI is something that we want to put emphasis on, as most of the indices to date have looked into economic vulnerability, environmental vulnerability, less so when it comes to human resilience and vulnerabilities. This approach will allow the multidimensional vulnerability index, so this scenario that looks into a holistic approach, to be factored into the SDG progress analysis. We may have at some point MVI adjusted SDG progress that we will look at and identify more granularly resource needs towards accelerating the SDGs. So that's the holistic approach. Scenario 2 looks into an aggregated approach as a global index based on the assumption that multidimensional vulnerabilities influence the volatility of a country's real GDP growth around its trend. So we are not talking about the GDP itself, the GDP per capita. We look into the volatility of the GDP growth around its trend. The Commonwealth, for instance, Secretary, have used a standard deviation of real GDP as the outcome channel to generate a parsimonious global index of development needs. And we have considered, we looked into this proposal and into the possibility to analyzing the standard deviation of real GDP residuals around the trend. This work could be extended to develop a statistical approach where we try to explain the standard deviation of residuals using econometric models. Again, those are very technical details. We'll look forward to that opportunity to discuss. And then a localized approach to the MVI, considering that while SIDS have a series of common vulnerabilities, there are also region-specific issues. And that brings me to the MVI that was developed by the Caribbean Development Bank to ensure that all SIDS can have access to development cooperation. And I will avoid saying concessional financing because I strongly believe that the multidimensional vulnerability index could be very well used to make better use of the existing resources of the existing development cooperation envelope as well, beyond looking into additional resources. The localized approach may limit options though and narrow down the focus of the index if it's only region-centric. And in that regard, we would like to learn from the Caribbean Development Index and ensure that we come up with something that goes beyond the region and that could be, again, relevant to all small island developing states, regardless of where they are. We count on the guidance of the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs, OHR LLS, in this process to ensure a coherent approach and optimal use of the time and the resources we have towards the MVI production. And the time element is actually critical. What we bring into this process as resident coordinators, and this is the reason for which we took the decision to start working towards meeting that demand, is the perspectives from the field, the strategic thinking that the RCOs now could make possible with the senior staff, both international and national staff that we have on board. I would stress again the importance of higher emphasis on social and human vulnerabilities, also ensuring that economic, environmental, and social dimensions of the would be properly factored into the index itself. The MVI will provide a very powerful instrument to the UN development system as well in analyzing the SIDS context, strengthening the relevance of cooperation frameworks of joint programs, and making sure that our development investment generate more value for money. In a previous discussion with the member states, I had an opportunity to speak about the importance of this multidimensional vulnerability analysis for us to come up with theories of change that are more transformative and that again ensure that SIDS can overcome some of the vulnerabilities that are very characteristic to them. And in the words of Professor Sachs, SIDS are vulnerable because of two main characteristics. They are small, and smallness of markets obviously comes with some significant challenges. And then they are islands, which of course refers to their remoteness, isolation, costs of trade, and all of the other challenges that come with that. And because of that, again, being small and being islands, we have large interannual shocks, and then we have lower prospects, lower long-term development potentials in the small island states. And that would need to be analyzed to better understand how we can accelerate progress towards the SDGs and what the needs are, including ultimately the resources needed. So we'll count on the support of the UN broader system. We look forward to also factoring in the proposal that was tabled by UNDP most recently. And of course, as soon as possible, as soon as member states consider necessary, we would like to have a technical discussion with the Alliance of Small Island States facilitating that dialogue. And I would like to mention that the feedback that we are going to receive today will be very important to guide our work. We look forward to an opportunity for us, the ABCs of the SIDS, together with Professor Sachs, to bring back some of the ideas that come through this analysis. And I will close my very brief statement by mentioning that the intention is to equip countries, SIDS and their development partners, the international financial institutions, with a methodology and a tool that would allow all investments, all forms of development cooperation to be productive of sustainable results for the SIDS. It's not the intention to just come up with some ranking. That's obviously not the purpose of this work. And I look forward to an opportunity to present more as soon as possible and appropriate. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Simona, for your presentation, and also really exciting. Thank you for coordinating the group from a wide diversity of SIDS, RCs, and other, Professor Sachs and his team. And we're really looking forward to the new ideas and new thinking that this group can bring into the discussion as we move forward. It's an exciting opportunity and exercise. Now, before I give the floor to our last speaker, I would like to mention that the floor after that is open. Please indicate in the chat function your wish to take the floor, and I will give you the floor in the order that I received those requests. So please do that as soon as possible and during this next presentation. Now it's my great pleasure to invite Riyad Medeb, who is the head of the SIDS unit at UNDP. And UNDP has come out with a very interesting discussion paper on this topic as a contribution to the ongoing discussion. And we are very much, I read it with great interest. I very much look forward to hearing your presentation. Riyad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Heidi, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting UNDP to this briefing to the member states. First of all, I would like to confirm that UNDP is perfectly aligned with the process described by OHRLS and UNDESA on the response to the UN Resolution 75215, as what we prepare discussion paper is one of the contributions that you will be receiving and consolidating on behalf of the Secretary General. What we have developed is an analysis based on 12 composite vulnerability indices, and we try to think what could be a multidimensional vulnerability index that take into account the reality of the SIDS. We did not develop a vulnerability index for the small island developing set, but something that will highlight the reality of the small island developing states. We were using 11 indicators for 128 countries. So the most important thing is to try to have the maximum of numbers of countries, and including 34 seats based on the 38 UN members. And the MVI developed, demonstrated that all but 5 seats are far more vulnerable than their income level would suggest. This vulnerability index was developed on 4 dimensions, one which is environmental, economic dimension, financial dimension, and of course, geographic dimension. And the main conclusion that we had that's for us is that using the MVI, non-LDC seats could have saved close to 1.5 of their GDP per annum in interest payment. So the role for us is try to engage in a discussion on what could be an MVI, which was based mostly on an index, which is the Economic and Environmental Vulnerability Index. And why we have used this one, because this is the one which is revised every 2 years and has covering 145 countries. That's what I wanted to say. The MVI will be presented to, as Sai introduced her to a webinar that will be organized for each agencies, and we'll be happy to discuss with all of you member states on our findings. Thank you very much, Heidi.
Thank you very much, Riyad, and we look forward to that webinar. And also, it was a very interesting way that you used some of the already existing EBI and adding some elements to that, and then looking at it from a point of view of small island developing states. So I recommend, if you haven't seen the paper, perhaps colleagues could share the presentations, including the presentation of Sai, Simona, and also Riyad, the UNDP paper in the chat function, so that they are there available for everyone to see. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to move forward, and I hope that this has been useful. I know it's been taken some time and long, but we wanted to just give you an opportunity to let you know what the UN is doing at this moment. And now it's my great pleasure and honor to invite the chair of AOSIS, PR of Antigua and Barbuda, Ambassador Webson, to take the floor. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Under Secretary, Mr. Secretary General Assistant, Mr. Harris, Excellencies, colleagues, friends. First, let me begin by thanking DESA for organizing this and for bringing us together. Already, a lot has been said, and I'm sure already there's a lot that we can say in response, and looking forward other members to hear what they have to say. Let me first of all say that this index is of great importance to SIDS. We have heard, I thank Sai for the history. And as I listened, I was saying, you know, we cannot wait another 30 years. In 1992, when this was first brought, as Sai explains, climate change as an example was a difficult issue. Today, it's a critical issue. Another 32 years, many SIDS could be non-existent. The economic situation, which came about last year, increased this challenge for SIDS from challenging to crisis level. What we do not want, while we appreciate all of the dialogue that's going on, the efforts of putting the different groupings together and sharing the information, what we do not want is another several months or years where several agencies come out with different indices and and therefore there's nothing specific that countries and that IFIs and ODA partners will have to use. What we must end up with, and what we must end up with quickly, is a document that governments can endorse and that IFIs will accept, that we can work with immediately almost. We do not just want a good document for the Secretary General. We want a usable document that can be implemented immediately, because that's what governments, I have been in this job for the last 5.5 years, and that's what I hear governments from across the SIDS territories, from the Pacific to ACE to the Caribbean, asking for. And that's what we must deliver. We can't follow the pattern of discussions that takes us years and years and years. It just won't work now. We've got to move from rhetoric and paper to action. And it is in that vein that I, as a colleague within the AOSIS leadership, feel very strongly, almost emotionally attached to making sure that we continue to speak out frankly about the needs and about the issues that is front. I had a very good conversation with Simona from Samoa in the discussion, and I explained our frank position, and we are very pleased with the work that is being done. I have received from UNDP the document, and there are elements in there that are immediately very useful. We need to be able to put all of these things together and act now. Again, for me, for most SIDS or all SIDS, for the governments that I hear and coordinate and collaborate with, it is about action now. And it is in that vein that we put ourselves, as my colleague did last year when she wrote to the Secretary General, we put ourselves right on the front line to work with you to make sure that this happens and happens quickly. And I know that at times I am very, very frank and maybe not diplomatic, but this calls for action that we have to, and we have to address this in a way that can bring solutions and help SIDS in their discussion. Whether we use the term concessional funding or not, it is going to help us with our ability to our strategy for development. And using the Samoa pathway, using the SDGs as our target guide, we need this index that can help us in strategizing. So my appeal is, let's move forward, and let's do so with haste, even though we are doing so with all of the competence and pulling the right people together. But we must do so that come the end of this year, that we have something that governments can buy into and use. So when the Secretary General presented, and he has been our biggest advocate, and when he presents this document, governments can buy into it immediately, and we don't have to. One last thing is, in terms of the negotiations, I would like to see also discussions held on the ground in the regions. I like what I see from the Caribbean Development Bank, and I would like to see academia and technicians from within the regions have a clear input, so that it is coming from the people, that if we use the United Nations language, we the people would have put this out together, and therefore buying into it would not be so difficult a task. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Webson, and we have heard loud and clear your call for action, and really taken note of the issue that we need to make sure that this is a usable document. It is something that gets the buy-in from the beginning, and that's why it's so important to engage with all the relevant stakeholders, including the IFIs, already from the beginning, so that at the end of this process we can end up with something that is acceptable and implementable. That is very much the idea of this and learning from those previous efforts that have not been so successful is also very much on my mind, on our minds. And I also hear you talk about the importance of including the voices from the ground. And that I'm also very happy to hear that as part of this process with the RCOs, you do, it links better the discussion to the discussion that is happening in these countries. Next on my list is Ambassador Roche of Cabo Verde, followed by Australia on behalf of CANS. Ambassador Roche.
Good afternoon to all. Thank you very much, Madame Heidi, to give me the floor. Let me also thank the organizers and especially the presenters for their useful insights in this issue. I'd like to make very quick remarks. First of all, my first question is, how can we move from unfinished business to a finished business? If we go back to 1992 at the Earth Summit, and since then, from conference to conference, until the last one, that was the Samoa Pathway Review Summit in 2019, the need is long due to contemplate SIDS with an international agreed evaluation and eligibility criteria for financing based on a multi-dimensional vulnerability index and not just on the limited indicator of the GDP per capita. COVID-19 introduced an emergency factor leading to the SIDS call on the SG to have a special window to meet the extreme challenge and the enormous impact they face as a result of the pandemic. Quantifying multidimensional vulnerability will help finance development to prioritize needs in the most effective way in both situations, either in the emergency or in the perspective of recovery and building forward better. We have all this work that have been done by multiple institutions from CDP. I followed the CDP work since 1991 until the last report on 2020, where they developed, they improved the 3 criteria based on income, on human assets, and the economic and environmental vulnerability index. We followed the different proposals by UNDP that could include also domestic research mobilization capabilities, purpose of the financing. We went through the structural gap approach by ECLAC that include infrastructure, education, health, tax policies, capacities, gender, environment. We have many other stakeholders as ACP, African, Caribbean, Pacific, and OECD that proposed to modernize ODA to focus more on development, to take into account higher concessionality and many other aspects. My point is that we must now build on these different initiatives, on these different works, and to come to a concrete and agreed consensualized international proposal for a multi-dimensional vulnerability index. And for that, I believe the UN is better placed to take the lead together with the small island developing states. I think this is long due, and it's time to move from unfinished to a finished business. And I believe that it is important first to carry out an harmonized classification of SIDS and SIDS middle-income countries among taking account, among others, poverty, human development, economic vulnerability, and so on and so on. And second, to come to a decision in how concretely to approach different SIDS and middle-income countries under the scope of these multi-dimensional indicators. Because the problem is not only the process, the problem is what we want once we have this multi-dimensional index, is to support in a concrete way, in a practical way, SIDS. Because the vulnerability of SIDS are not only economic and environmental, they are also institutional and human. Enable SIDS to enhance economic growth, resilience, and access to finance is important. The definition and adoption of a multi-dimensional index must be an inclusive task, as I said, including UN, other international financial institutions, and the SID themselves. And the time factor is important as we want to approach the new decade of actions to the horizon of 2030. Because at the end, it is important to bring concrete support to SIDS in 4 basic areas. First, support SIDS economic competitiveness and diversification in areas where each of one has opportunities for economic growth, overcoming small scale and productivity constraints to attract investment and private credit. Second, to build and strengthen resilience to climate change, to extreme shocks like COVID, and in social areas. Third, to mobilize finance, namely access to source of finance and liquidity, including ODA and concessional finance. And fourth, institutional capacity to address these 3 previous areas. How they can plan their own development, their own competitiveness and economic diversification, how to mobilize finance, and the multi-dimensional vulnerability index can be instrumental to that. And third, how to build resilience, and their capacity must be supported in these 3 perspectives. Then my question here, once I congratulate all the work that is being done regarding this multi-dimensional vulnerability index, is that we must now build on the work done to come to a concrete proposal and decision in a consensual base, and the UN can take the lead. And one must not forget that the multi-dimensional vulnerability index, it's a way to support concretely in a practical way the SIDS, and time is there pushing us as we see to the 2030 horizon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rocha, for your very insightful comments and really looking at how we can best build on the different ideas that have been presented, and for your classification of the 4 key areas of how we can enhance economic competitiveness and diversification of economies, how to build resilience, how to mobilize finance, and then finally also how to build institutional capacity to address all of these problems. Thank you very much for your comments. Next, I have Australia on behalf of CANS, followed by Untitled.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I'd really just like to thank the briefers on behalf of CANS. You can see from the very, very long list of participants today that this is an issue of very keen interest to member states. So I really want to thank you for bringing us along on this journey every step of the way and keeping us in the loop on this. I'd also really like to particularly thank Sai for that history. It was very, very eye-opening, and I thoroughly agree with the distinguished chair of AOSIS when he remarked that we really can't wait another 30 years for this. We do need to keep it front and centre of our agenda going forward, and to find a way to finish this business, as others have said. So with that, we really look forward to supporting your work going forward on this, and CANS stands absolutely ready to support you in any way we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your support to the process and the real strong support that CANS is providing for this process. Next is my dear colleague Pierre Encontre from UNCTAD, who also has been working on this for quite some time. Pierre, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Heidi. Special greetings to Madame Utoikamanu, unless she has left already, I don't know, and Mr. Harris. Heidi, there is one thing that really strikes me. That's the near total silence on the CTP's Economic and Environmental Vulnerability Index, as if it did not exist or as if there was something wrong with it. Moreover, it's a tool that has been in existence for about 20 years, and of course developed by DESA, the same good colleagues who seemingly do not pay much attention to it, unless I am wrong. I am sure that Riyad has that in the list, in the analysis that he has done on various existing indicators, but I would like to say a few words about it, because we, and I will say I have good news for Ambassador Webson. There is nothing to wait for, because we have what we need. Not we, I mean, of course, we, the UN as a whole, you know, it exists. It is there. The EVI, it's been restyled last year, as you may know. It's now very much multidimensional economic and environmental vulnerability index, and it shows it. You can see that in the structure of it. Although they have kept the old acronym, it's still referred to as the EVI. It is a genuine index. It covers all developing countries, which is what an index ought to do. Incidentally, there is no such thing as an MVI for SIDS, by the way. An MVI could be just an MVI, period, by definition, across the board, covering all countries. And on the basis of that, you could single out any special group or special category and see how they fare in comparison to the rest of the entire population of countries. But you do not develop an index for a narrow or special category. So that is sort of funny language that we keep seeing and hearing. I just wanted to make this a remark. The EVI is a genuine index. It covers all developing countries. It is based on, obviously, on a number of things that matter when it comes to vulnerability analysis. It is structurally convincing in the sense that it reflects the fundamental dimensions of vulnerability, namely the exposure to shocks and the magnitude of the shocks. It is, to a fair extent, I said it's multidimensional, because it does justice to both the economic exposure and the environmental exposure. Frankly, we think that the UN is well equipped to deal with the urge to take concrete resilience building action, which is really what matters most. In this regard, I would like to make a related remark. I don't know if you, frankly, Resolution 215 is an excellent resolution from our viewpoint. Before paragraph 8, which we are talking about today, there is paragraph 7, which from our viewpoint is even more important than paragraph 8. Paragraph 7 recalls the continuing commitment of the international community to take urgent and concrete action to address the vulnerabilities of SIDS. That doesn't remind you of something? These are strong words. They echo paragraph 22 of the Samoa Pathway, probably the most important paragraph of the pathway. What we would like to say to member states refers more to paragraph 7, frankly, than to paragraph 8, because paragraph 7 reminds us that supporting SIDS in their resilience building efforts is what matters, something they need more than ever, particularly now after a year of pandemic, added to the permanent shocks they are faced with. Urgent and concrete action, that's the language that is used, does not limit itself to inventing new indices, particularly when we already have good indices. I don't think that the fact that paragraph 8 comes immediately after paragraph 7 means that member states believe that an index by miracle is going to answer their plea, this plea for a global new initiative. This is what was advocated by remember the Prime Minister Motley last year on television. The urgent and concrete action SIDS want is twofold, and we have discussed that with many SIDS leaders. Number one, through thorough country-specific profiles. There is nothing, that can equal that in order to identify the shocks on a country-specific basis and find reasonable resilience-building avenues for the country. And secondly, through systemic progress towards SIDS status, clearly the necessary condition for any SIDS treatment to be workable one day. So SIDS status, of course, implies, first and foremost, we know it, to identify SIDS on the basis of criteria. This will not guarantee special treatment, but at least it will increase the chances of getting better attention for SIDS. So we still have homework to do in the UN to arrive at that. But frankly, what we are saying here, is it useful to measure again? This is an unfinished business. Everything has been said about it. All of that is true. Vulnerabilities, while we have at least one good existing indicator, the answer is simply, let's be realistic. The little bit of money, energy, and time that we can spend on this, they are urgent matters. Look at paragraph 7 as opposed to paragraph 8. They complement each other, but it's no coincidence if it comes ahead of it. It's a reminder, and it's not the first time since 2014, since Samoa, that member states rehammer the importance of pursuing these efforts for urgent and concrete action. When member states talk about urgent and concrete action, it means for years been going on. It means that that kind of action has not yet taken place. So we believe on other avenues, and what matters then, of course, is that we are well equipped, including statistically speaking. And our view, Heidi, is that the CTP's EVI is the best existing indicator at the moment. We do not see any pressing or significant need for more efforts in that direction, because I would be very curious to know how better you could go in that direction, considering in comparison with what we already have. So this is the state of mind in UNCTAD. We believe in the EVI. We also believe that we are open to the idea of probably, without upsetting the EVI, examining possible enhancements of it, particularly on the exposure to risk components. So what we have been doing so far, involving little work and no cost, we've been using, in addition, in conjunction with the EVI, two existing indicators I would like to simply pay attention to and to remind you of, if you know them. One is the Physical Vulnerability to Climate Change Index, the PVCCI of the Ferdi Foundation. Of course, Professor Guillemont, I am sure that you know the team, who, by the way, was the father of the EVI 20 years ago. And the other one is the Productive Capacities Index, which we ourselves, UNCTAD, have been developing recently, the PCI, with the acronym PCI, yes. And the rationale of it, of course, is that using the PCI among the exposure components will be a way of paying attention to the importance of productive capacities as the necessary condition for being able to diversify and accordingly reduce the risk through exposure. That's economic exposure, better diversified, more, I would say, smarter economic specialization, probably in most cases would mean lesser exposure to economic shocks. So these two things complement the EVI. And to sum it up now, from our viewpoint, the EVI plus ad hoc use of these two extra indicators at the moment is more than enough to enable us to highlight what matters above all is that SIDS is statistically, of course, SIDS are clearly exceptionally vulnerable, a lot more vulnerable than the rest of the developing countries. And accordingly, that is, of course, something that militates in favor of special attention. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for your reflections and of course on the issue of MVI in general and MVI for the SIDS. I think it's important for this exercise to keep in mind that our mandate from the General Assembly is really specific to the small island developing states. So that is what we have been asked to do. But of course, the issue and the discussion on vulnerability in general can be very important for other countries as well. On the issue of the EBI, and Riyad would be the better person to respond to this, but I understand, as I have read the UNDP paper, that this is what their paper is really based on. They are looking at the composites of the EBI, the 8 composites at the moment, and they have added 3 additional composites to it, one that relates to remittances, one that relates to tourism, and one that relates to FDI. So it is this is very much taken into consideration the fact that the EBI is an existing index that is approved and indeed used on an approved basis at the UN. So therefore that is very much, but Riyad can talk to that fact, and that can be more, I am sure, elaborated in the webinar that UNDP will be organizing regarding this paper that they have produced. I have 2 more speakers on my list. One next would be Francesca Casar of Malta, and followed by Elliot Harris. Ms. Casar, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm the Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, Director of OHRLS, Madam Moderator. Colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank DESA and OHRLS for this informative briefing, as well as the presenters that put forward their invaluable ideas and knowledge. I think I might be speaking really on behalf of all participants here that it was a useful discussion in terms of engaging member states on this issue. I would like to be brief. I would like to take this occasion really to underscore Malta's support to the ongoing work which is currently being carried forward through the UN system on the development of an MVI for SIDS, as well as for a plausible and agreeable way forward, not only from our national perspective, but also in view of our role as current co-chairs of the Steering Committee on Partnerships for SIDS. It is a known and undisputed fact, really, that SIDS face severe structural and inherent challenges, and the COVID-19 pandemic has greatly exacerbated these existing vulnerabilities by restricting travel, collapsing investment in tourism, and so on and so forth. So really, against this background, Malta supports the potential development and coordination of the work within the UN system on an MVI for SIDS, including on its potential finalization and use, and we therefore welcome the work of multiple stakeholders, especially academia, through the University of Malta and other policy-oriented platforms such as the UNDP. So Malta, to conclude, also through our work, as I said previously, as one of the co-chairs of the Steering Committee on Partnerships for SIDS, we stand ready to assist this process in any way we can in order to see these efforts reach fruition. Thank you very much for your time and for this briefing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that important intervention, and really focusing and emphasizing the multi-stakeholder approach and the expertise, of course, that Malta has in this regard, and your role in the steering committee for partnership for SIDS. Now, the last speaker on my list is Eliot Harris. That's a good opportunity for you to wrap up from DESA's perspective on the discussions that we have. Elliot, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Heidi. I think I want to start off first by congratulating Simona for one point that she made, which is how utterly important it is to integrate into whatever we come up with the social dimension. I'm going to try to illustrate that with a factoid from my own country, the Bahamas, where per capita income is estimated between $27,000 and $30,000 a year. But a lot of that income is generated in one sector, which is the financial sector. It's an enclave sector, provides very little employment to the population at large. Population is employed in tourism, and that has meant that this COVID crisis has decimated the incomes and the livelihoods of the population of the Bahamas. And so that kind of vulnerability needs to be a part of the index. We have to be able to assess that structural weakness, because otherwise we will not be able to formulate policies in advance that could help to build up the resilience. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment when we talk about diversification. So with all due respect to Pierre, I do think that there are elements of the EVI that do have to be enhanced. EVI is just not enough. It just absolutely doesn't address some of the social and distributional issues that are a plague on the ability of these countries to ensure adequate standards of living and progress for all of their citizens. The second point, though, and I think Ambassador Rocha, you were absolutely correct in the four areas that we need to concentrate on in the SIDS. The support for diversity and overcoming the productivity gaps. A lot of that will require investments, building up resilience, especially resilience to climate change, you're right, mobilizing finance, and I'm going to come back to that one, and institutional capacity building. And I think the vulnerability analysis allows us to identify where in each country we need to be able to direct the resources. And I said my intervention is not just the financial resources we need, it's sometimes also mobilizing the support, non-financial support in other forms. But on the financing side, I think Ria said something, it was a quick note, but I think it was fundamentally important. It is not the access to financial resources on concessional terms that's going to make a big difference for the ODA. Because one thing is utterly certain, the fact that we now consider a different threshold for eligibility for concessional financing will in no way increase the amount of concessional financing available. All it will do is increase the number of countries eligible to receive money from that given pot. What is far more important, though, is that with that qualification, as Ria pointed out, it's how the debt is treated that we will see a change. And as Ria said, if they had been classified as vulnerable, if we had used the EVI or the multi-vulnerable index that UNDP has calculated, they would have saved 1.5% on their interest burden this year alone. And I think that that is the critical point, because the world is far more likely to look on the debt situation of the SIDS from a different perspective if we have changed the threshold, the classification criteria, rather than expecting that the real change is going to come about through access to the few billion of ODA resources that are out there. So I think that that is something that we do have to keep in mind. And once again, I think that might be another aspect of the vulnerability that needs to be properly assessed and clearly put into evidence, because I think that is one of the things that is one of the greatest weights pulling down the SIDS right now as we look forward into the post-COVID recovery period. Heidi, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elliot, for excellent kind of wrapping up on some of the elements of the discussion. And also I fully share the idea that we do need to develop the EVI to have different composites in it that better reflect the realities of the SIDS and the people on the ground. It has to be a people-centered approach as we are looking into it. And I really here in my head echo Ambassador Webson's point on finding out ways that are implementable and concrete and that can actually bring change on the ground to the lives of the people. This is what we are trying to do. So here, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this briefing. As I said in the beginning, this is a first in the line of several that we hope, in order to continue this discussion and dialogue with you, make sure that all the technical work, the political work is being discussed. We have a broad based approach to it, that we engage with different stakeholders as we move forward. And I can just, first of all, thank all the presenters for excellent presentations. I'm very appreciative of you being with us and sharing your important work that continues. And I want to thank DESA for the partnership in this and our continued collaboration as we move forward. And most importantly, I want to thank all of you, all the member states, different stakeholders for being with us and starting this dialogue. I can assure you that OHRLS and DESA will remain at your disposal. As Tishka had mentioned, we want to hear from you, your ideas, your contributions, your guidance is very important to us as we are moving ahead and hopefully to something that will have a very broad-based support when we finish this process. And I, of course, extra thank you to USG Utoikamanu and ASG Harris for being with us through the meeting. With that, I wish you all a very good afternoon. Thank you, and until next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.